Now, I'd like to invite David Schneider, who's the VP of Engineering of Systems Imagination, to help us understand how they've used the big data clusters investment that we've done in SQL Server 2019 to really change the game in the research that they're doing. David?
Thank you very much, Kumar. So at Systems Imagination, what we do is we try to find new oncological therapeutics. By a show of hands, how many people in here have had a family member or a friend and it's impacted you, from cancer? See, yeah, I've lost 2 family members to cancer very recently. So it's important to us, and everybody in this team picture that you'll see right here, young to old, this is part of our Tempe team, has had a family member impacted by cancer. It's a very complicated disease, and we're very passionate about what we do. That complexity comes with data and scale. There's petabytes of data, and it's over 10,000 or actually tens of thousands of files. So before, when we had to do analyses, what we would do is we'd take those tens of thousands of files and we would format them in some way that we could probably absorb them into another system and then maybe use some type of ETL to get them into a database, and from there, harmonize the data, then extract some data that's scoring, and then take that and put it into some type of neural network or machine learning. With SQL Server 2019 big data clusters, we could do all of that in one system, and that was really groundbreaking. And so we said, maybe we can test a hypothesis that hasn't really been tested before at scale, and that hypothesis is around something called synthetic lethality. So in a normal cell here, we're going to do a brief biology lesson. We have 2 genes there that both perform DNA repair. In the cancer cell, a mutation in the BRCA gene there is preventing it from performing its job of DNA repair. The PARP gene, however, is still doing that job. So synthetic lethality takes advantage of this against the cancer itself by we inhibit the PARP gene from doing its job. Now neither gene can perform DNA repair, cell is no longer viable. So this is a really great way to target cancer cells within a tissue. The challenge here, of course, is, as I said, the scale of data. There's roughly 22,000 protein coding genes in the body, so you're looking at hundreds of millions of data points with hundreds of features on each one. I'm going to show you a little bit how we had to harmonize that data and everything else. So the first thing is we have to make sure out of tens of thousands of files, we're looking at the right file to harmonize. So one of the great things we can do is we can actually preview data here, and I'm just going to show you what that looks like. When we preview the data, we can actually look at the file inside, and remember, we're all here inside a big data cluster, and we're using Azure Data Studio to do this. So I can go, yeah, that's actually the NCBI file that I want to look at for genes. That's a really great thing. Now I don't have to question which file I'm pulling in to harmonize. I'm going to go ahead, for the sake of brevity, to start importing some more libraries so we can look at some things later. But now that I know that I wanted this file, I want to be able to pull it in. So what I would do is create an external table and then actually run SQL on it. Now, what I just did here is I actually took data that's sitting in HDFS and did something called data virtualization, so I can actually operate on that, merge it with other files in SQL Server in the SQL Server context. That means now I can do my harmonization in SQL Server, even though I haven't had to move those files in and out of SQL Server themselves. That's incredibly powerful and really helps us validate and move through our harmonization much faster. The next thing, and this is also really important, is in my little magic button here, we've again collapsed this for time constraints, I set up a Spark instance, and so this Spark instance is sitting in the big data cluster, so when I actually export data from the SQL Server, I'm not going to have to move it into a new compute instance. I can just grab the data directly from the SQL Server into the compute instance here. And here again, we can see there's another way actually to view the same data. So what we did is actually we looked at all gene coding pairs. That's the hundreds of millions of them. And what we did is actually analyze them against what would be a synthetic lethality. And we did that in under the 25 hours at a cost of less than $3,000. Now, I want to compare that to how long it took for us to do it, and we are experts at doing this locally. It took us several weeks and equipment that cost $80,000. So this was an incredible, unprecedented increase in both speed and efficiency of what we were doing. I encourage you, those of you that are interested in this work, we are published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology and also in the 2019 ASCO findings from this year. And I'm going to go through a couple other things here. I'm going to go through and set up and train our network model, and then we're going to go through at the end and kind of really hit the key points here, which this experiment did. And it's important that we recognize that this is just a subset of the data that we're looking at. So what we did, and what the neural network just did, is we actually took the output of all of that data directly from SQL Server in the Spark instance that's running on that big data cluster, and we scored it, and we have predictive scores out of there. So what the scientists would do from here is they would then look at this data, we would output it to a file, and I'll show you exactly how we do that. And then they would look at it, and they would actually look at it right here in Sandance. And so a scientist would look at probably the predictive score against the other scores. So now when we send this data out to the systems biologists and the molecular biologists and geneticists, they can look at this and start filtering it by score, look at the data and start understanding, well, which pathways, which biological processes, which molecular functions perhaps are impacting this the most. There's something more than that to this though. This is actually, each one of these is actually a data point, and that's very, very important because now somebody can actually look at this and say, oh, those two genes, I actually know one of those, I know why that would be targetable, and that's why that's really useful. So this data can now be filtered again, fed back in, and we can rerun the hypothesis. So SQL Server 2019 Big Data Clusters allowed us to take petabytes of data in tens of thousands of files, look at it, make sure we're harmonizing it correctly, using data virtualization to actually look at the data inside SQL Server, harmonize the data in SQL Server using SQL, and then run a Spark compute engine on the output to generate this output, and then we could then from there give it to the systems biologists. There's something else here that came out of this, and I think this is really important. Out of this experiment, we actually found 5 new novel synthetic gene pairs that have moved from here, this is called in silico testing, into the lab. That means that there is 5 new things that the lab can move on faster than otherwise happened. This took less than 23 hours. This is an acceleration of from weeks to 23 hours to put something into the lab to start testing on. I'm David Schneider. I'm with Systems Imagination and with SQL Server 2019 Big Data Clusters. We're helping accelerate cures to cancer. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And this entire system is running in production, correct?
I'm talking.
This whole system is already running in production and you're sort of using it,
This
right?
is, everything you just saw, this is live. This is our real system. The only thing we did is we cut the data down a lot because we wanted to run it in 6 minutes, not 23 hours.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's fantastic to see what you achieved with SQL Server 2019 Big Data Clusters. Now, moving